We are moving back to our pot burner topic, and today's topic will be ephedrine use, and basically what's brought people into this kind of thing. Maybe you want to open up and see about what is ephedrine, maybe where does it come from, maybe a little bit about history and stuff. Uh, because we already discussed in previous videos that in some countries it's illegal, some countries it's still openly widely accessible. I know in UK most likely you won't be able to find any because as far as I know it's illegal. But 10, 15 years ago anyone could get it. So let's dig deep into it. What it is, what it does, how it works, why people choose it, and so on.
Yeah, definitely. Ephedrine has seen its time of popularity. I still think it's almost an underrated supplement in terms of fat loss potential for anybody really that's looking to have that bikini look or get that level of leanness. Um, it comes from the Ephedra sinica plant. Not all Ephedra plants are the same. This one is also known as that Ma Huang, I think they pronounce it. Um, they isolated ephedrine hundreds of years ago, like in the 1800s, and it was originally used for asthma up until I think in the 50s, 1950s or so. It kind of dropped off as they found better alternatives. Um, but even today, they still have it on the cart on standby during operations because it's very effective at increasing blood pressure. So if something is going on from anesthesia or whatever, they'll give you a shot of ephedrine to get everything kind of up and going again. So it's still relevant, but it's been studied for decades. Um, the legal status, like you said, it definitely does vary. I think one of the main reasons is not so much. I know there were some deaths when it was being abused quite heavily, in the earlier 90s, maybe even in the 80s. But that was just because it was literally being abused, like crazy, crazy dosages. But I think more the reasons that it's banned is it's an active ingredient for crystal meth.
Hmm.
So they really don't want people to be able to get their hands on it that easily. In fact, I think in some countries, if you can buy it, the milligram dose per tablet is limited, and you have to like show driver's license and show all these pieces of identification so they can kind of like inventory who's buying the ephedrine and how much. And I think it's more or less for that crystal meth sort of scenario. It's
It's funny
essential
you say
nervous
that
system.
because when I was growing up, I remember you could buy it in a shop, and it was under the brand name something starting with Z. I don't remember. I just didn't pay attention to them. But I know that truck drivers used to use it just to do long haul drives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's a central nervous stimulant. And it has interesting effects that slightly vary from other, fast burners that we're going to probably talk about in the coming weeks. But it can act on alpha and beta receptors, and it seems to preference beta 2 receptors slightly more than beta 1. And what that does is that sort of improves fat mobilization. So when we talk about wanting to lose body fat, we kind of have three steps you have to consider. You have to mobilize it. You have to, which means get the triglycerides out of the fat cell into the bloodstream. Then you have to transport it, and then you have to oxidize it or burn it. So it's like a three-step process. So you can't really burn body fat if you can't mobilize the body fat. So ephedrine works very well at mobilizing body fat by that beta 2 agonism. Um, it also has an indirect action of seemingly keeping dopamine levels increased because it is basically the it's inhibiting norepinephrine reuptake. So basically you're exposed to more dopamine, and that's sort of the why people are kind of a little bit more, feeling good, feeling alert when they're using the ephedrine. So it kind of has that unique effect that it can kind of work on both. The um, the bioavailability of it is pretty high orally. like high 80s, maybe even 90%. So it's pretty effective. It's going to be 3 to 6 hours of a half-life, peaking at around 1.5, 2 hours. So it's a great, or can be a great tool. And you can actually be multiple dose throughout the day. So it has a lot of benefits. You can also inject it. And all that's going to do is basically change the peak time and then the onset of action and then the effective life of the drug, because it's going to be just getting into your system quicker. I think the problem of it was, again, just people overdoing it, or they had predisposition to heart issues, or potentially they have high blood pressure. And because it can act on alpha receptors as well, it does increase blood pressure, which is why they use it have it on standby in an operation or an operating room, because if they have to drive blood pressure up quickly, ephedrine does a good job. So it definitely has a lot of tools. It's always up to us to implement them for the right reasons, and then obviously be aware of what you're dosing.
Do you know how they came about to start using it for fat loss? So what was the original use of it? Just to feel good, or?
Well, as far as I understand, and again, I don't really dig into the history of that stuff too much these days. I mean, years ago maybe, and I can't remember everything anymore, but it was originally people were using it for asthma and allergies and stuff like that. But because it offers an increase in thermogenic effects, so you're getting basically a 5, maybe 10% metabolic boost. Your body temperature goes up as well from the vasoconstriction, and there's just a lot of things that it actually is beneficial for when it comes to fat loss, because not only does it increase mobilization by binding to those beta-2 receptors, but it also increases thermogenesis by 5%-ish. If you use it with caffeine, which is the original EC stack, the ephedrine caffeine stack, that 5% seemingly goes closer to 7 or 10%. So that's not nothing. Like if you think about 1,000 calories, instead of taking away 100, an ephedrine dose is the same thing in theory. So it becomes beneficial, or can become beneficial, especially with bikini athletes, because they're smaller people in general, right? They're very petite, they're very lean. They don't have a lot of calories to work with on average anyways. And there's that sort of that critical threshold where if you take the calories too low for too long, we run into potential deficiencies in, nutrients, minerals, etc. And then also what we've talked about in previous videos, where we can disrupt menstruation and stuff like that. So sometimes instead of taking away more calories, we can just add something like a thermogenic effect from the ephedrine to give us a little bit more of a theoretical deficit. The other thing it can be good for is it very good at blunting appetite. So again, if you're deeper into a dieting phase or something and hunger is a thing, ephedrine is very good at helping curb that. Something else that I think is interesting is they studied the fact that it reduces the amount of nitrogen that we excrete. So that's theoretically leading to a muscle sparing effect, because we have a more net positive nitrogen balance at the end of the day. So there's actually potential muscle retention qualities with ephedrine as well. It's not really the same as the anabolic effect that women will experience from clenbuterol, but it's still a muscle retentive benefit, which again becomes very, very handy long term.
So what would you say is how common is it for females bikini athletes specifically using ephedrine, or is it more specific towards the countries where it's still legal and you can easily access it? How much of that do you actually see in, let's say, competitive females, and how much do you see it in athletes in general that go for this over anything else? Is it more legality thing, or is it, hey, this used properly will give you a bit of a mood boost, a bit of an energy boost, appetite suppression, all the things that you actually want to feel when you are eating next to nothing?
Yeah. I think that's an interesting question. Um, and from an observational point of view, I don't know why the prevalence isn't as high as it used to be, given how effective I think it can be. I think the reason is in the competitive side of things is because ephedrine is available in some places and not available in other places. So it almost doesn't have that allure of taboo, ooh, this is illegal, therefore it's good. It's almost like, well, if I can get it, it's maybe not that great. Clenbuterol is going to be better. And I almost think that that's part of the reason why it's not as used as often as it used to be. I just don't think people are aware of the benefits it offers. Everyone just right away thinks black and white. I'm in a dieting phase, so I need a fat burner. That's all. That's all we're thinking about. But fat burning, comes from an energy deficit. So if ephedrine offers things like appetite suppressing over time, that's going to lead to less energy intake. Therefore, the ability to create a deficit becomes that much easier. If it's offering a muscle sparing effect over time, that's going to lead to more, at least retained lean contractile tissue, especially deep in a diet, as opposed to potential atrophy. So there's a lot of these indirect effects from ephedrine that are very beneficial over time. But everybody's looking for right now. I need an acute effect right now, right now, right now. And so I think it's maybe lost some of its appeal that way, because from a thermogenic boost, 5 to 10%, it's not nothing, but it's not a crazy amount. It's not like you're going to lose pounds of fat in a week. But I think people are missing the boat on that one, because I think ephedrine, given the safety profile behind it, I know that we all agree, well, you and I agree, and people that pay attention and study stuff all agree, there's no guarantees that it's safe, but the safety profile of ephedrine dosed appropriately is very, very, very high. Really, the only issues are increased blood pressure, and it's not a lot, so that could become relevant to somebody that has high blood pressure. And then obviously a predisposition of some sort of heart arrhythmia or some problem with their heart, that could be a problem because it is going to increase heart rate. But the effect of the heart rate increase isn't drastic either, until you start to add things like caffeine or other stimulants that really kind of amplifies the heart rate increase. So overall, ephedrine is seemingly quite safe. And for me, the risk reward here is a no-brainer. Something interesting is that it also seems to get more effective with chronic use. And that's another thing that people seem to forget. They stop feeling the effects, and they think it's not working anymore. That's very common with clenbuterol. People think that you should be cycling clenbuterol on and off, because the receptors have basically been saturated or downregulated or whatever terms they want to use, and the drug's not working anymore. But that's never the case. The drug always works if the drug's in place. It might start being less effective in some drug instances, but it doesn't stop. But seemingly with ephedrine, it seems to get better. And they don't know the mechanisms of why. There's some topics or studies and stuff they look at, like beige fat and brown fat and these types of things. And humans don't have a lot of that, so they find that hard to believe that that's the reason. But at the end of the day, as far as I understand, there's still no concrete evidence as to why it's getting better over time, but it seemingly is. So in other words, the longer you're using it for, the better effects are becoming.
So what for you would be chronic use, and what would be just acute? Acute probably a day or week or whatever. But we already discussed previously where we talked about what people usually do, that with women, the risk is usually the length of the application of any kind. That is kind of enhancing any risks. Is it same with ephedrine, or what is the chronic use that you think, hey, you can still keep getting this stuff in your system and not running into long-term issues?
I'm not aware of a duration of time that has shown to become problematic. As far as I see, I think you can use ephedrine. I just think that, like any other drug, it's just a tool. So if you need the tool, you use the tool. If you don't need it, there's no need on using it. But the thing is with ephedrine is it has a few sort of applications that it could be beneficial for. So it could then promote time. It could promote the reason for using it longer. And I think you could, again, outliers. There's outliers always, but I think again for a healthy population, I think you could keep it going, continuous use. It could be a good tool. Let's say you didn't want to use it for fat burning because of its appetite suppressant and it's, you know, inhibiting the dopamine reuptake and stuff like that. It could be a beneficial tool at the end of a dieting phase when hunger is up, mood is sort of down. It could be a good application there to just kind of keep basically compliance in check and avoid any type of rebounds. It could be good long-term use just for that, like I said, that muscle sparing effect. But I think just in general, the fat burning effects of it aren't nothing. And they've studied ephedrine on its own, caffeine on its own, nicotine on its own. They study all these things, and it seems like ephedrine on its own has a little bit of bump in the thermogenic effect. Caffeine on its own has a slight bump in the thermogenic effect, but together it's a synergistic effect where the sum of both is greater than the individuals alone. So if you get like a 5% from ephedrine and say, for example, 5% from caffeine, you apply them, you get like a 15% synergistic effect. It's not quite that high, but that's sort of the general consensus of it. And they've actually did a lot of study determining the dosages of what's needed. And it's long been known that around 20 milligrams of ephedrine and 200 milligrams of caffeine together is the quote unquote optimal. You're probably going to get the most for the least problems, if any. And that is the typical dose. And if you think back to the EC stack that was super popular, or the ECA stack because of the addition of aspirin, that was super popular in the 80s and 90s. And I wonder if maybe the abuse and the few deaths they saw, which led to the, you know, banning it in certain places, just kind of took its popularity away to some degree.
So this brings me, when you mention ECA stack and aspirin, kind of highlight to people, hey, this is used so you don't run into blood pressure issues and whatnot. But let me give me more information about what you think are the health needs for anyone even considering this to be somewhat useful tool, because from what I've heard so far, people will just go, hey, this sounds amazing. Why don't you just take it all year round?
Yeah, it definitely can come across that way. I don't think anybody has a need for it all year round. I think it would just kind of depend on what exactly are you looking for, because there could be other tools in your toolbox that are better at the effect you're looking for. There are better fat burners than ephedrine. They're just come with greater legality implications and greater risk possibilities. But if it's something you're already using and it's doing basically the same thing, it's immobilizing of fatty acids, stuff like that, why use both? They probably operate on the same mechanisms anyways. So I don't think it would be something that you should be using all the time, but I think anybody that's not predisposed to heart issues or has chronically high or hypertension, like high blood pressure, I don't see much of an issue with giving ephedrine a try. I would combine it with caffeine, and I would probably start half that instead of a 20 milligram ephedrine, 200 milligram caffeine dose. I'd probably go half, like 10 and 100 and something like that, and assess the effects. If you find that heart rate or blood pressure are getting to a point where it's a problem, probably it's not a combination that you want to be bothered with, because you're not really going to get a lot of the effects from 10 milligrams and 100 caffeine. You kind of really want to get to that 20. And if that low dose is already causing a problem, doubling is probably going to be worse and just not worth the risk, in my opinion. But I mean, obviously, to each their own. I'm also of the belief that you should only resort to a drug when you need it for the goal. You know, if you have an energy intake that's sufficient that you can afford to lose some calories and still be compliant, still have all the energy it needs to do all your training, all that stuff, I don't think just throwing a drug for the sake of throwing a drug is the right move. I'm a big believer of less is more, especially when it comes to drug use, because like we talked about before, there's no guarantees. You know, there are outliers. There are people that are going to have a one-time acute problem, and you know, we don't want that. We want to avoid that kind of stuff. So I think you do what you can with the basics first, and then if they're running the course, or you're starting to see, you know, plateaus or something on the horizon, then you start looking at what options do you have, and what would be the best tool for that.
So if somebody comes and their resting heart rate is 110 beats per minute and blood pressure is off, they probably should think about, dude, you need to get yourself back in check first. Because I see it a lot with girls that it's nowadays probably more prevalent that their resting heart rate is quite high. Maybe because of stress, maybe because of social pressures, maybe because of many other things. And then they hear about this stuff and they think, wow, this is amazing stuff. It seems like really safe, but you are not safe to yourself. You are just not checked to even come near anything like that. What we are trying to do is just put out what people do, so you are not delusional that you can look like Instagram model all year round, because even they don't look like that. And they do all these things, first of all, under supervision of somebody who understands what they're doing. Well, some of them, not all of them.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, let's be honest, they don't care about their health implications. They just stay lean so long that they really don't care about health until it's too late.
That's right. So, and they usually suffer some physiological effects that are incredibly difficult or very time consuming to get up to reverse. And most of them just either don't know how or don't have the time to put in. And I think a lot of them are quite regretful with some of the decisions they've made. But I agree with you. If you have health markers that are already in question, especially when it comes to heart rate and blood pressure, ephedrine is not a good choice. Like exercise would be a good choice. Like maybe try increasing that. Looking at your dietary strategies, etc. But again, these are compounds that are commonly used. We chose this one today because I think it's used to be super popular. I know it's still prevalent around, but not to the same degree as some of the more taboo ones. But people are using these things anyways. So if we can at least give them some information on maybe how to use them and what to use them for, it'll give at least some people an idea of, hey, you know what? Ephedrine would be a good choice here, but maybe I don't need it right now, or something like that. But yeah.
So it brings me to the question, why not use more than one at the same time and just get over and done it with 3 weeks? Let's say ephedrine, what did we mention? Caffeine, yohimbine, clenbuterol, GH. Why just not throw all of them at your body and get over and done with it in 4 weeks?
Well, that's something you can do, but I think that's going to be very individual. That's going to be determined because of a timeline you just can't get away from. I think setting yourself up to have to throw everything at you at once is a terrible move. I think that should be avoided at all costs. I understand sometimes there's no choice, and it is what it is, but that's something that you should be trying to avoid by proper periodization over a given time frame. But then the other thing to consider is that, and you see it with androgen use all the time, people will throw like 3 or 4 drugs from the center columns all at the same time. They're all essentially doing very, very similar, if not the same thing. So you don't need multiple things doing the same thing at once. And some of these fat burners are the same. They operate the same way. So you can't get a 10% increase from this one, plus the 10% from this one, plus the 10% from that one, if they're all doing the same thing. It's just not going to be a linear escalation like that. There's going to be this sort of threshold that's what you're getting out of the stimulation. You can only stimulate the central nervous system so much. If each compound causes an increase in blood pressure, an increase of heart rate, an increase of thermogenic effect, they don't just keep compounding on each other. So essentially, you could be exposing yourself to a lot of drugs for no more, and therefore risk, for no more reward. So understanding the compounds, if you have to throw everything at once, understand the compounds is important. Yohimbine, for example, is a different mechanism at play. So they could go hand in hand, and oftentimes they do. We'll do a video on yohimbine as well, because it is kind of a unique in its own. Yohimbine works in a different way than ephedrine, so you can use them synergistically.
Would you say that it's more of a mental pressure that, hey, you need to use this? Because I have worked with a lot of girls that have been told, hey, you're not going to get in shape unless you take some drugs. And then they come crying to me, oh, such and such told me I'm wasting my time. I'm like, my honest opinion is, if you can't get in shape without drugs, you should never try to get in shape. It's just how it is. It's same like with training. If you're trying to gain muscle and you can't gain muscle without food and training and resting and getting fit, you're not made for that. You're just not. You just accept that you are weak. So that's it. Just leave it to someone else. Do you think this is the same things that people think, hey, let's diet, let's get ready for this, let's get ready for that, and then they go to their friend or personal trainer or whatever, hey, what can I take to get in shape? Often not are you asking, what can I do to get in shape instead?
I agree with you 100%. I think if you can't see results just from your training nutrition, there's a problem. Something's wrong there for sure. So yeah, I think there's a lot of pressure. And I do see the same thing. I actually working with a client right now, and she was told that she won't be able to get to this level of muscularity without all these drugs. I'm like, that's nonsense. Now, obviously, drugs change the game drastically, which is why all professional sports use them. But that's a very niche scenario. All those professional athletes using them were already athletes. They were already probably close to, if not at the top of their game naturally, and have now gone to the next tier. That's different. So yeah, I do think there's pressure, but I also think, given the fitness industry is such a shady smoke and mirror sort of place to be, I also think there's a tremendous amount of shitty coaching. And when you have drugs in play, you can't really not get them where they need to go, because the drugs will do everything. And that's what I see more often than not. I see the worst training and worst nutritional protocols you could imagine, yet the person looks the part because of all the drugs they took. And then when the drugs come out, because eventually they're going to have to, they have a rebound that they weren't expecting, and it starts them off in that vicious spiral of just basically a cascading negative effects. I think that's more common than the pressure. I think the competitive world, there's pressure. You have to look a certain way. You need these drugs. I see that for sure. But in people that aren't looking to compete, just look in shape, they're just getting coaching strategies that are just wrong, like just straight up terrible. And so the drug then is the crutch that the shitty programming can lean on to get the results that otherwise wouldn't be there.
Yeah, to me, it sounds what we probably both have observed. It's what I would call is mentally unstable coaching, where they obsess about, you need to do this, you need to do that, and you definitely need to take this, or you're never going to get results. And they just put so much pressure on these individuals who just want to be heard and kind of understood, but then they're being led and misguided by people who have no understanding what they're doing, and just copying and pasting what their coach did before, who didn't know anything anyway. And now you end up in such a mess that those people end up in a really bad stage when they leave that said coach, because they learn nothing. They just learn how to take pills. And it doesn't really end up very well. So, and something you kind of highlighted about like professionals, I know a lot of people who've been really successful, and then they start kind of reaching for something. And what I have observed is not so much to improve their performance as such, it's to avoid breaking down their body. Because it's more about like, hey, how the hell do I recover from this? Because I'm so mentally obsessed about training. And even if I don't take anything, I will train both to the wall, so to speak. And now they just need something to accommodate that inefficiency to slow down. Is that something that you see that makes more sense, rather than someone who's just pushing their physique or performance and whatnot through drugs, and there is no other means that they're not going to do anything else unless they take something?
That's absolutely what we see, and we know that steroids, especially the magic in the steroids, is increasing your ability to recover from the strenuous training. Um, and I agree. I think it's needed at that high level of athleticism to be able to recover and keep from breaking down, keep joint integrity, soft tissue integrity, etc. A lot of that comes down to periodization as well. But obviously, given certain sports, they're on it's either in season or off season. So your schedule is your schedule. So there is the need for them at that high level, and that's why they're there. And I'm not in disagreement with that at all. Nobody wants to watch average people play sports. We want to watch extreme athletes playing sports, and that's what it's going to take. I think in the fitness industry, when I talk about the fitness industry, I'm speaking more of like the aesthetically driven people. It's different than a performance. Bodybuilders don't really need to have a performance ability. They need to look good in their underwear, like it's almost like a pageant. Now, the bodybuilding, it's sort of the outlier of the sport because they abuse drugs, but because it's not really a professional sport like you would see, it doesn't have the same sort of monitoring going on. Like the bodybuilders are taking drugs based on the information they got from the bro in the gym. The athlete in the professional football player, he's taking some drugs based on the doctors and professionals on the team. So they're getting very different advice right from the beginning. So I think the bodybuilders are just abusing steroids. They don't need the amount they take to recover from the type of training they do, because their training is not breaking them down like it would be, a combat athlete or a rugby player or something. But it's still causing them growth, and they're striving for the bigger, the better kind of thing. When it comes to the aesthetics of the bikini or the females, I think a lot of the drugs that are being, told to be used is oftentimes more unnecessary. The amount of training they do is they don't need that amount of drug. So it really kind of depends, it seems, on who we're looking at, what demographic we're looking at. But overall, in the aesthetic fitness side of things, I think drug prevalence is massive, and I think a lot of it is misunderstood and used terribly, terribly poorly.
Would you say it's correct to assume that, firstly, if you are trying to go this route, you need to make sure that your health is in check, you are mentally stable to understand that you don't need this, but this can be a little bit of tool to kind of push last couple of weeks, and most likely you should also accept that the level of leanness you are seeing in social media, first of all, is not maintainable for long run because it's going to backfire and not keep you healthy. But if you go that route and accept that, okay, if I'm throwing in some fat burners like ephedrine, I'm going to use it for a couple of weeks to make myself as lean as I can for this holiday or summer season or whatever. But then I need to accept that I need to regain some body fat to make sure that I'm not running into long-term health implications, especially as a female, not even an athlete, but as a female in general. It's not good to be lean for too long.
Yeah, I think the females really need to be honest with what their physique goal is, and the bikini leanness on stage, there you can't attain that, or sorry, you can't sustain that all year round. That's just not going to happen. The ones that do are using exogenous hormones to support their system. Maybe they've already had their family and they're good with all the risks that come with that. If they haven't had their family, that's something on their mind. Staying on exogenous hormones all year round because your body fat level is so low that you need the exogenous hormonal support, you're running a pretty big risk of infertility, in my opinion. That's something that needs to be understood. From that point on, the level of leanness that the female wants, some of it is sustainable all year round. Females can be in the teens when it comes to body fat percentages and not have any detrimental health effects long term, assuming they're staying at that level of body fat leanness with a sensible approach to dieting, nutrition. It's not just starving and drugs. That's the exception. But if you can get your body composition to a point where there's enough lean tissue that your calorie intake is in the high teens, low 2000s, which is very, very doable for females, they can maintain a level of leanness in the sub 20 easily all year round, and they feel fantastic. Nothing's going wrong. Libido's good, menstruation is regular, health markers are all in check, and they can do that all year round. And I think they should strive for that if that's the aesthetic goal, is to have some level of leanness. But from that point on, then how lean they need to be determines how sustainable this will be. If their goal is to look stage lean all year round, they really have to take a step back and understand that the only way that's doable is with drug use, quite a bit of drug use. And with that's going to come quite a bit of risk. And you have to just be accepting of that if that's what you want to do. I think if more females were sort of painted that picture from the day one, this is what it's going to take, I think you'd see a lot of different decisions being made. I still think you'd see people dieting down, getting lean, achieving their goals, but they wouldn't do so in some of these extreme manners. They would take the time that it's needed to sort of adapt and coax the body along rather than just kind of forcing it all the time, because you really are hammering on the gas pedal long enough will cause the engine to break down.
So something you mentioned in the first videos, where it's basically if you're a woman, you probably will benefit much more if you focus on getting stronger, gaining more muscle, instead of just being obsessed, I need to shrink down, get lean, and all those kind of things, which I think is something that you are highlighting now as well, is that, hey, if you're using these kind of strategies and if everything else goes sideways, you get weaker, you start losing muscle, you start eating incredibly low amount of calories. Now you not only start to run into problems with infertility, you start running into bone mineral density issues, mood swings, hair loss, you name it. There will be so many things that you will just regret for that goddamn six-pack. It's just not worth it.
I totally agree. And something that women have to remember too is that lean contractile tissue, that's crucial for, as you just said, bone mineral density. We need to preserve that. As you age, it's probably a lot more difficult for females in their 20s, that still have Christmas in their eyes, that, hey, I can look like Barbie, and my boyfriend's the Ken, and he's a physique guy, I'm a bikini guy, a bikini girl, we're on top of the world. But that's like a fraction of time in your lifetime. And if you burn out all the things that you need to have that physique goal in your first couple of years of training, where are you going to be in the later 20s or early 30s? And what if you caused something problematic, like you've caused infertility issues, or you've lost bone mineral density? Like, a lot of these things aren't what we're looking at on a scale. They're there physiologically, they're a certainty, but they're not going to show their face for 10, 20 years. It's kind of like right now, all these, I got 20-year-old kids, guys coming through wanting TRT because that's the new trend right now. I'm like, you guys are going to be feeling great right now, libido's through the roof, chasing women in your 20s, and in your 30s, when the problems have now set in because you probably don't know how to do it properly, it's not going to tell you until 10 years from now, and then you're going to have to deal with that. And you could, and we'll see it, and we've already seen it to some degree, but I think we'll see it more. You'll see people that have made some tragic mistakes, and they'll be fucked up. Like, they'll be either sick or mentally not well.
Oh, for 2-minute fame on Instagram.
Yes. Right, and that's the thing. So I think if females do get a good understanding of what's involved in this, they're very intelligent. They will make the right decisions, but I think they're just not being given all the information up front.
That's awesome. As usual, appreciate your time. Thanks for doing this again. I already have some questions from women actually messaging me. Hey, could you talk about ephedrine? So this is perfect timing. And so yeah, next week we're going to jump into some of the other things that are out there, they are used, talk about like what's where, how, why, and go from there. So with the purpose of just giving as much information as we can to educate people. Hey, what you are seeing in social media might not be just chicken and rice. and what they are telling you that they are eating skinny sauces and whatnot. More often than not, it's just a front kind of picture, and there's so much more to it. And sadly, we can see a lot of people who are doing these things, like we see firsthand, and they're running into so many issues. I personally see that it's not so much physically that they can't recover, but mentally they struggle to do anything, because first thing what they were told, you need to have all these things, and you're like, no, this is like a topping on a cake at the end. If you really need any of this, but you need to make yourself self-aware about what it is, how it works, why people use it. You need to understand that some of these things are very illegal. Some countries, like you said, in Canada, you can do one thing. Then you go to Turkey, you can do completely different thing. And then you come to UK, and there will be, again, different implications. So you need to be aware of everything that's happening in your country, what you can do, what you can't do, and have clear outcome in your mind. Hey, do you want to get lean, or do you want to be fit, healthy, strong, and live better quality life, so to speak?
Totally. And genetics, we haven't touched much on that. Genetics come into play here massively, with what you can do, what you can get away with, what you can take, what you can. Like, that's a very, very big component. Some people genetically are gifted in certain ways and ungifted in others.
It's very obvious in biomechanics, for example, where people go like, hey, I want to bring up my deadlift, and I'm like, your reach is 60 inches. You're not going to bring anything up. Forget about it. I don't care how much of what you're taking and how hard you're going to train and this and that. You're just not built for that. So, and then you see somebody who can reach their bloody ankles while standing, like, of course, it's going to be a great deadlifter.
Yeah, exactly.
So cool. Yeah, I'm going to let you off, and I'll speak to you next week.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks.